The Holdovers is a comedy about a bitter instructor at a boarding school who's forced to stay on campus over Christmas break to watch a group of kids. So if you already watched the trailer for this movie, then you should have hopefully noticed that it's supposed to look like it was made in the 70s. And unlike a lot of movies nowadays that are supposed to look like they were made in a different era, this one actually did a pretty good job. The problem that a lot of those films have, though, is that they tend to just throw a black and white color grade and some film grain over top of footage that still just looks really modern with deep focal lengths, wide apertures, slick camera moves, and a lot of cuts and editing. If you really want to give the audience the sensation that they're watching an older film, then you need to shoot it the way that it was shot back in that era. All that said, the cinematography in this movie actually did a pretty good job of feeling old. There were a few shots in the movie that felt a bit modern, either with the way that the shot was framed or the way that the scene was blocked, coupled with the camera movement, but overall I thought it was done pretty well. But let's talk about the story. In this movie, we follow Mr. Paul Hunnam, played by Paul Giamatti. He is a not-so-charming teacher at this school, and while the majority of the students were sent home for the holidays, there was a small batch left behind for him to supervise. Mr. Hunnam is what I'm sure a lot of you would consider to be a bitter old man if you actually knew him in real life, but on screen I thought he was great. He is humorously pompous and eloquent when speaking very condescendingly to these kids, and that was really funny to me. The social dissonance was the fuel for a lot of the humor in this movie, either him being a jerk or people bluntly telling him off. And it's not just the kids that have issues with him, even some of the adults are not afraid to set him straight. The group of kids is a lopsided and hormonal bunch. The main kid, Angus Tully, played by Dominic Sess, he's actually really smart despite still being a very crass teenager. I actually loved his dynamic with Mr. Hunnam because he's smart enough to vibe with him despite them having an obvious personality clash. Honestly, this was the most I've enjoyed a relationship between two characters in a movie in quite a while. So at first, this movie seems like it's going to play out like a totally cliche and family-friendly holiday special. And while there were some cliches, I think that what separates this movie is that it was actually tailored to a more mature audience. The tone is very family friendly, but in case you didn't notice, this movie is rated R. It has some very mature dialogue and subject matter to accommodate an older audience. The way that these characters speak to each other is not at all family friendly. If this movie didn't have the adult themes and was focused more on Angus than Mr. Hunnam, then I think it would have been what I was worried it would be. It probably would have just been an underwhelming, cliche, and unnecessary trek into the past, but it thankfully wasn't. It was a fun and honestly beautiful period piece about an unlikely fellowship between a group of people that hated that they were spending the holidays together. I will say that the second act ran a little long. There were even a couple of scenes, only a couple really, that arguably didn't need to be in the movie. But I would personally prefer a movie running a little long and giving us a bit more character depth versus feeling rushed and unemotional just because we didn't really spend enough time getting to know the characters that well. Honestly, I did not expect to like this movie as much as I did. The perfect cast, great dialogue, and hilarious character dynamics easily outshined the more familiar aspects of this movie. I fully accept that I might be aiming a little bit high and overrating it, but for me personally, I gotta say that it was incredible. The emotions it had me feeling at the end were very real. Like, I actually resisted the urge to cry. I think that this movie will best serve an older audience. Those of you who grew up in the 70s and 80s will probably find this to be a very nostalgic watch. But even for the millennials and Gen Zs, I do think that there's still a large portion of you that will enjoy this. Thank you for taking the time to watch this review. If it brought you any value at all, please consider giving it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you later this week with my reviews of the new Hunger Games and Next Goal Wins.